Okay, so today I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I keep trying to make the secondary style like sort of anything random, where I was even willing to do like, just random clips on YouTube. So I did like something to do with sports last time, and I made some actual pretty bad predictions in the process, like, oh, the Wolves are going to win in 7, despite the fact that they're down 0-2. I thought that was like a bold prediction that, just how at least the Nuggets obviously won 3 in a row, and then they still lost in 7, but at least they came back. But being down 0-2 isn't as big of a deal as people made it. They certainly were stupid in saying, oh, they're going to get swept. But today, let's say she tries something different, where I'll do something like maybe with politics, because, okay, Trump just was convicted of the 34 felony charges or whatever for the hush money trial, right? So let's go into the whole background. If I've discussed this kind of whole Trump hysteria a lot over the years, or like a long time ago, closer to like when he first got elected or was running and stuff. So let's qualify it like this way. So people always play the false duality game, where it's like, oh, if you're not on one side, you must be on the other. Like either you're Republican or Democrat, or either you're pro-Trump no matter what, or you're pro-Biden. Like there's no in-between or nuance, right? And that's the fault of everybody too, because a lot of people do play into that. But here's the problem with this whole situation, right? Let's go back to 2016. Like I looked at Trump the same way as any other politician. Like even though he's an outsider and that arguably comes with certain positive qualities, like you'd rather have somebody from the outside. This is part of the reason why he won, right? Somebody who's like an outsider, even though yes, he's a billionaire and he's rich and whatever, doesn't mean he's a good guy. It just means at least it's not like a career politician again for the millionth time. So that's part of the reason why he won. And then obviously with Hillary, a lot of people didn't like her. She's entrenched too much in politics for too long, right? There's a certain standard of that. Like when you're in politics for that long, you have too many, you're too compromised. Like you have too many things where it's like, you have too many things where it's a situation of, what do you call it? It's like you owe too many favors and you have too many incentives and just different associations and things like that you might have. And so the whole point with that is that's why she lost. Yes, she won the popular vote. So here's one fallacy. Let's count the number of fallacies, right? The number of lengths that people go to try to, the number of lengths that people try to go to just because they don't like the guy. So that's fine. I don't like the guy either. I didn't vote for him in 2016, right? I'm not to blame for why he won, but it at least helps to be objective about it. So one is that he was an outsider, which that certainly proved to be true. Like, see, this is the problem with the whole media and everything that people try to look at, which is just the fact that there is clear media bias, so I can be objective. I didn't vote for him. I don't like him either, right? I look at him the same way I do as other politicians. Like, I don't care for any of these people. Maybe one of them can be more or less slightly useful than the other, but I'm not dug in on either side. Like, I could care less, right? So when you look at it like that, you're just looking objectively and saying, okay, he won because of that, so let's address fallacy number one. It's like, the Electoral College. Oh, that's why he won. So he didn't win the popular vote. But now all of a sudden you bring that up as a disqualifying factor. Like, he's an outsider. So if there's one person on the planet who didn't have any influence on the Electoral College existing, right, it's not like he advocated for it or something like that, right? If there's one person who had an ability to try to change the way the college works, out of those two at least, Hillary and Trump or even Biden or anybody else in politics, that's the point. He was an outsider, so even if he didn't like how the Electoral College worked, or he did, right, he didn't have any influence over it, so how can you blame that on him? Yeah, right, just because people dislike him so much, now they're going to say, oh, well, he only won because of the system that he had nothing to do and he didn't create, and as an outsider could even pose a disadvantage. Like, generally that system has favored people in politics for whatever reason, like, the Electoral College and the way it works. Like, how many independents and outsiders have won throughout American history? So when he's the exception rather than the norm, now you point to, oh, well, he won because of this. In other words, he beat them at their own game and now they're mad about it. He didn't make the Electoral College. He had no ability to change it, right? Hillary could have argued against it throughout her career. Like, did she ever do that? Did she ever say, this is a bad system, we need to change this, as she was a senator or any other role that she played, like in government? Did she ever try to make that case or fight against how bad the Electoral College is? Of course not. But so that's fallacy number one. Another fallacy just with Hillary, let's trace it all the way back, is like people are saying, oh, vote for her because she's a woman or whatever, right? There was like a pro female element there. But then guess what? With Tulsi Gabbard, they don't say that. With other people, they don't say that, right? They only say it with her because whatever, she's entrenched again and somebody who's established, right? So why not vote for Tulsi Gabbard then? Why not vote for Kamala Harris even as she was running herself, not as a VP, right? They're all women. So if you want to use that identity politics as an idea, right, we've sort of regressed and reverted to where, in the early 2000s, we kind of looked down on this way of thinking, right? We had moved past that, like, okay, now we're just treating everybody as people and just, not that it was rose-colored glasses and perfect, but at least it wasn't like this emphasized. Now we went back to that, right? Some people blame Obama for that, like, oh, the fact that he was a black president, and then everybody, anytime you criticize him, sometimes people would say that, oh, you must be racist, or sort of draping yourself in the flag of that, like, Trayvon Martin and this and that, and it turns into that, and it's a good way to silence debate and discourse and criticism that just, accuse everybody of being racist or something of the sort. For example, the border is a good example of that. People are coming all across the world to come across the Mexican border just because there's no oversight. So you don't even know what race the people are who's coming across is. So how could you be racist by saying that? Like, we just want proper border security like every other country in the world, every civilized country in the world has, or every president in the last 50, 100 years has had some form of robust border security, right? Like Bill Clinton had border security. Obama had better border security than what we see here. So it's not just like a Trump or a Republican thing. Yes, they might be a little more strict on it, and you can always debate, make it easier to come in. But the core principle was being attacked in some banal way, like the very idea, right? It's like these overreaction mentalities that people have, where sometimes it's called woke or whatever, where you're basically looking at it like some basic fact of life that's been the case for a super long time, that both sides of any political aisle and everybody has agreed upon. Like, nobody was in favor of what we're seeing now, to the extent that, just let people in with no oversight, right? Nobody did that. Obama didn't do that. He even has this clip on CNN. You can look up, like, if you send children over, right, we'll send them back. Now, that was more so when they would send children by themselves over, right? Less so than, like, with whatever they call them, like the coyotes or whatever the term is. The point is, he even said that he was trying to act tough on the border because he was being maybe criticized for not being tough enough. Now instead we're on the other side, where we're on the other side of things, where you're basically like, now just let everybody in with no process. You can make the process easier, right? Advocate for that, like make it even easier than it already is. It's really not that difficult, right? I know plenty of people who have gone through the system and so forth. My point is just, you can make the system even easier to take advantage of and to come inside, and refugees and asylum and all this kind of stuff, but don't just subvert the process and say, no, it's racist, it's not fair, so therefore just let everybody in indiscriminately. And again, even that word, so you want to discriminate? Yes, I want to discriminate against people with criminal records, or, whoever, or at least you want to know who comes in, right? So there's a fallacy like with Ellis Island. Give us your tired masses, your huddled masses, whatever, right? But they would send people back. You still had to check in. It doesn't mean you could just come into Ellis Island with no oversight. They would send people back for being sick or for various other reasons. Again, some of which might not have been fair. But you'd rather have a process than no process, and you can at least try to fix it. So it's the same thing with like, defund the police, right? The police do something bad and they have flaws and something wrong. So the reaction isn't let's try to fix them and improve it. No, it's just like, let's just defund them and be anti-police now all of a sudden. Again, that's what it means to be woke, is like something that you believed in or practiced or accepted and didn't question your whole life. Now all of a sudden you suddenly question and turn your back on, right? Some basic thing like just police existing, or the border, having border security. These are basic, uncontroversial issues that you never questioned yourself or never talked about before. Now, all of a sudden, because the corporate media is saying it very loudly, defund the police, BLM, all this kind of stuff, and, border security is racist. Now, all of a sudden, you just follow along and parrot that. That's what it means to be woke. You strongly, passionately believe something that you never showed any signs of believing before, right? Some people might have said that all along, and then there's some credibility there. At least you were the one person in 2004 saying that, we should defund the police, and you would have been called crazy then, right? And so at least you were ahead of the curve. But the vast majority of people are just jumping on a bandwagon when they hear something like that. For example, BLM is a good example of that. They had been around for a while, and then all of a sudden with the George Floyd thing, now the media co-ops them and everybody jumps on the bandwagon. If you really believed in them, why didn't you support them before that, right? A lot of people probably even hadn't even have heard of them before that, right? That's what I'm questioning. It's not the process. I'm not saying whether you should or shouldn't support them. Of course, they did scam people out of money and buy like a fancy house with it and all kinds of, bad things that they did. But regardless of that, even if they were good and perfect and you should still support them now, the point being that it's a consistency issue, right? You all of a sudden support something that you never even thought about or never supported before, as in the organization. They had been around for years before that, right? But oh no, now because CNN keeps talking about it or all these mainstream outlets keep talking about it, now you want to support it. So that I definitely have to question the inconsistency. I'm somebody who believes in credibility at least. Like, for example, I've said George Bush is an unconvicted war criminal. I've said that for a very long time, right, but nobody's prosecuted him. So interesting that they have this sort of hierarchy that they'd rather go after Trump for something he did that's more minor and more recent, at least, than something that happened way before 2004, roughly, depending on, where you peg his actual war crimes in there, because there are quite a few of them. But the point being that they let that one slide. They didn't even try to pursue it. This is where the credibility comes in. Two things can be true, right? Let's say Trump actually is guilty of all this and it's not just a show trial and not just a sham. So there's a few layers to that, right? The point is, let's say he actually is guilty. But the reason why they're going after him and going after him now and so aggressively, whereas they ignore countless other people's crimes, is because, again, it's to influence the 2024 election. It's because they've had an animus against it for a long time, whether it be for political reasons, obviously, Democrats, etc., and government, and also the corporate-owned media definitely doesn't like him collectively, aside from Fox. And that's one of the best ways to identify some of the bias here. Right, it's like you can be objective, right? Like I'm at least trying to be objective, and people say, well, Fox News this and Fox News that. You're not wrong. Fox News is absolutely biased. Guess who else is biased? CNN and NBC and ABC, they all have bias too. And a lot of it has shown, at least in the last several years, right? At least like 10, 15 years ago, maybe it wasn't so bad, but they became super obvious with their bias against Trump, and so the whole presidency was like that, his 2016 to 2020. But the point is that, let's say, okay, on one hand, here's one scenario. He actually is guilty, but you should still criticize the process by which he was found guilty, by which I mean they're going after him selectively for strictly political reasons. So, like, this is the kind of stuff that would happen in Russia or China, right? How do we get rid of some political rival who might be running against Putin and might actually have a chance to win or something like that, right? What would they do? You might end up dead in the extreme cases, right? Oh, he just fell out of his window, wink, wink. Or he might... Again, you might get arrested for some crime that, again, one of two things. Maybe a crime that you didn't commit and you're framed just to get rid of you, but how about the other layer? A crime that you actually did commit, but that was overlooked and ignored for a while, right, that nobody cared to prosecute or whatever, and now all of a sudden they're doing it. So people will somehow be misguided this way, like, oh, well, he really did commit a crime, so no one is above the law, except for everybody else, including, again, George Bush is a Republican too, so why does that matter? But, right, so it's nothing to do with that. It's just like they don't care about that, but more severe war crimes, all this kind of stuff. And then, a lot of other people in government, the Hunter Biden fiasco, all these kind of things, like, again, at least give them equal treatment and equal interest, regardless of how people want to shoot certain things down. So my only point is they ignore stuff like this and then they wait for the opportune time. So it could be one of two things. Either they're just framing you and it's just a show trial just to try to get rid of a political rival, which clearly it could be that too, or you really did do something, right? A lot of these people have skeletons in their closet that you could, pull out when it suits you. So if you really... only when he runs for president, now everybody's after him. The whole rest of his life, he never committed a crime, he was never charged with a crime, right? Maybe he committed several, but they ignored it and turned a blind eye. So you're wrong on two counts. You turned a blind eye back then, and now you're only focusing on it for the wrong reason. So that could be the case too. So why not look at it objectively like this? Maybe he really is guilty of some of these things, right? But still the reason why he's being charged for them and why it's come to this now is entirely for political reasons, right? So it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, oh, so you think the fix is in and he didn't really do it, or it's all a lie, or you think he did do it and he's a bad guy and lock him up. Why can't it be in the middle? Maybe he did do it, and maybe respect the legal outcome, the legal judgment, even though there are certainly biased questions all over it. But the point is, even if he did do it, right? Why can't you look at it like there's still a bad incentive behind it that we should be cautious of, right? The timing is too convenient, right around this election, the circumstance leading up to it. Like, if you really listen, people will tell you what the circumstance is that's going on. Like, there was this great Time magazine article from like the 2020 election where it's like, oh, the secret shadow campaign that helped to save democracy. Now, they might be saying it in a biased way where, oh, they're rooting for it and they're happy it happened. But the reality is that they're basically acknowledging, oh yeah, the media and other influences did circumvent Trump's ability to win and sort of basically dictate and manipulate the outcome of the election. So you shouldn't need to do that. That would be my only point. Like, why not believe in social Darwinism, which is a concept that people really don't seem to get in the modern day, I guess, is like for example, with Twitter and censorship and stuff like that. I'm always a fan of user-focused techniques, basically. So I could block, like, I'm on Twitter and I see something I don't like, so I could just ignore it or block that person myself, but that doesn't mean the platform should block that person, or it doesn't mean, there should be rules on the platform. I have the ability to block or ignore or engage with anybody that I want, so it's up to me what I see or what I pay attention to, right? So the control is in my hands. So the difference is, people would say, no, it should just be blocked or banned from their end, but there would be no need to do that. So it's the same thing here, where it's like, why can't you look at it like, I don't know, basically, there's a certain amount of bias that exists, so the way to solve it is not to put yourself on one extreme side or the other, right? You can still be critical of a process, like, there is clear bias, and so there's a pattern of that going back for several years. If you want to say that there isn't, then that's fine, right? We can disagree to disagree there. I've shown so many, I had a bunch of, compilations of these that I should re-upload or something that showed a lot of media bias. Like, they're saying things that are personal or whatever, just things that, what was it, Anderson Cooper saying he's a fat turtle sitting on his back in the sun. Like, would that phrase come up in a news journalistic sense? Like, he's not a turtle, right? He's a human being, technically. So what they're saying is inaccurate. We got to fact check CNN, and right, that's an Orwellian term that obviously, who are the real fact checkers in journalism? Oh, it's the audience. The audience can decide for themselves what they believe and what they don't. So it's an indictment against the media on two levels. One, that they fail to accurately portray whatever the truth is, even by their own standard. If they're saying, oh, this is the truth and you should believe it, so then they engage in the weakest argument ever, which is to attack the voters. Oh, 70 plus million voters are just wrong. They're all just crazy. 70 plus million people, even though that's more than the population of most countries, period, right? Like, that large of a group cannot be discredited, like, oh, they're just Trump's base, or oh, they're just MAGA, right? 70 million is not a marginal group of people, right? So clearly that questions a lot of things. Like, it doesn't mean even that they're right or that you win because of it, right? But it just means you can't discredit that group, so I'm not going to do that. And, you reduce it to its lowest common denominator, like, oh, one of those 74 million does something extreme, so I guess that discredits all 74 million, as if, one out of the 81 million people who voted for Biden, hasn't done anything extreme. So playing that sort of game doesn't work. But what was the other point I was making? It's just like, you don't have to put yourself on one side or the other. There's extreme media bias that was shown for a long time. And you might think, like, what is media bias? Like, people will defend it and say, well, it's just negative reporting. You're just being overly defensive of him. Again, as if you have a horse in the race, which you don't. So that's where false duality falls apart. I don't like the guy. I didn't vote for the guy. But that has nothing to do with that. I'm being objective and saying, right, like, there's a difference between you just report events that happen, but here's the difference, right? There wouldn't be this sort of shock factor. So here's where it fails on two counts. Okay, Donald Trump gets over 60 million votes the first time, right? He gets around 60 million votes the first time he ran in 2016, and then he wins because of the Electoral College, whatever, again, which he didn't create, so I don't see how you could disqualify that. You can change the system if you want, but, I mean, everybody knew that's how it works, so now you'll say, oh, he only won because of that, which, again, like George Bush kind of won because of that, and other, or there was some controversy with Al Gore and him, I can't even remember, but, like, Al Gore just declined to contest it and just let it go, basically. He didn't want to keep going back and forth forever. So the point is that in 2016, right, he got 60 million votes roughly, and then he got like 74 million in 2020. So what does that mean? He got more votes the second time than the first. Now, normally when that happens, just for contrast, like Obama got less votes in 2012 than he did in 2008. So therefore, it would be an indication that he still won. You can still win even if you get less votes, but whenever your votes increase, that shows you that this is a pretty good sign, because you get to look at it like your likelihood of winning. If you increase your vote total from the last time that you already won to now, your chances of winning are very extreme, right? You're very likely to win. In fact, probably nobody's ever lost under that circumstance, where you get more votes the second time than you did the first time. Because if it was enough to win the first time, it's very unlikely that having more of them would be bad. Like again, Obama got less votes in 2012, but he still won even then. And so the point is that, what does that tell you? That would indicate he must have had a good presidency, and people liked his presidency, right? He must have done a good job. In fact, by that metric, objectively a better job than Obama, because again, his vote total went up. Now, it's an indictment against the media in these two ways. Let's say Donald Trump is just bad and, he was a terrible president, right? So based on that criteria, if the media accurately reported on his presidency, then his vote total would have gone down, because people would look at that and say, well, he was a bad president, so I'm not going to vote for him. Problem solved, right? But instead, more people voted. So it's one of two things. Either they didn't accurately report that and weren't convincing enough with doing that, or they were so biased and one-sided that he almost got like a sympathy backlash, where they feel like, he must be good if the media is taking sides against him, or something like that, where, again, how else would you explain more people voting? Either he wasn't as bad as they're saying, or what people make you out to believe, or they did such a bad job, and they kind of even played into that by giving him so much undue attention that some of that negative attention becomes positive, that people either aren't buying what they're selling, or they're seeing the bias behind it, so it creates a sympathy, like they feel like they're taking sides against the corporate-owned media apparatus, which clearly there's a bit of a hive mind to that. You can single out Fox News, but that's just one outlier. Like the majority of networks were all kind of saying the same thing. So there is a concern factor at work there. Right, so his vote total went up, right? So normally you would win that, and so something unnatural happened. Like, for example, even now with 2024, it's like, if you don't like him, let's let social Darwinism decide, which means that if you don't like him and don't want him to win, what do? You don't vote for him. So just don't vote, and don't vote for Trump. There you go, problem solved. And if he's as bad as people say, then he shouldn't win, right? Naturally, just like with last time, he didn't win in 2020, so what's the problem? What would you be so afraid of? So you wouldn't need to lock him up or disqualify him or do any of these things that people are hysterical about. So even if I'm his biggest adversary and I'm like, I don't want him to win, and I hate him, and he's a terrible president, worst president ever, this would still be my position. I'm a little more objective and fair in the middle than that, but even if that was my position, here's what I would say. Let social Darwinism decide, kind of like it sort of did last time, even if it's unnatural in a way that I'll explain in a minute, but let that be the outcome. So he'll lose because he was just such a bad president, or because he's such a bad guy, so therefore he'll lose. So what's the problem? What do you have to worry about, right? It makes it seem dubious when you say, no, let's try to lock him up first, or try to get him with all these charges, or try to, disqualify him from running. That I have to question, because now I don't understand that. Like, why would you need to do that? Again, people say, well, he is guilty, he is a bad guy, but again, the timing is so selective, and there's a bit of false duality with that too. Like, so does that mean that he's just immune from prosecution? We can't come after him for any of his crimes? But it's like the boy who cried wolf syndrome, where they tried to get him for collusion with Russia. They tried to get him for insurrection. All these legal settings in which he's been acquitted, but all these conspiracy theorists on the other side are still hanging on to them. He really did collude with Russia. He really did do an insurrection. Even though, again, in a proper legal setting of the country, which you have to respect, he was acquitted in both senses. So the point being that, you have to respect the legal outcome. Otherwise, it is a conspiracy theory to say, right, again, if he was guilty in those settings, that would be different, at least for those charges that they brought, right? He was acquitted in pretty quick time for the insurrection charge in 2020, And again, his term was about to be over anyway, so this is where you have to wonder. There is something unnatural about it. Why not just let his term end and it's fine? Why do you have to do that? Or, again, here, why do you even have to go after him this way? He should just lose naturally. So what's the big deal? And nobody was very eager to get him on anything before he ran or whatever. So there are clear incentives at work. Again, people can put on the blinders, but that's all I'm questioning. Like, let's be weary of those elements in society. And so my solution to the false duality isn't that, oh, you got to be a pro-Biden mindless sheep, or you got to be a pro-Trump mindless sheep that way. Why not just vote for an independent? Just say, okay, if your sole criteria for voting, like in 2020, was, oh, Trump is bad, so I'm not going to vote. Like, this is the way you break it down, right? If Trump is bad, then just don't vote for him, and the problem is solved, right? So that's how voting actually works. There's no such thing as voting against somebody, so you can only vote for them or for someone else. So in other words, if you don't like Trump, don't vote for him, and the problem is solved. So you didn't vote for him in 2020, you won't vote for him in 2024. Then from there, you can make a decision. Either don't vote for anybody then, or vote for somebody that you actually have conviction in. So looking at Biden's terrible run, and I said this even in 2020, don't vote for Biden or the other dominant political party in Democrats, vote for an independent then. So 81 million people who might be mindless sheep who are like, oh, well, Trump's bad. So, okay, then don't vote for Trump. And even if you feel compelled to vote for somebody else, even if your criteria is this fallacy of, oh, we're voting against him, by that logic, you could vote for anybody then. Okay, just vote for me, right? Vote for Kanye West. Like, there's no criteria there. Oh, we're voting against him. But then vote against him using Joe Jorgensen, like an independent. So 81 million people could have voted for an independent there, and it would have been the same criteria and the same result. So how do you argue against that? You wouldn't be voting for one of the two dominant political parties. You wouldn't be voting for Trump or Biden. You would be voting for Joe Jorgensen or somebody else. You could do the same here now. So I'd say the same thing. Rather than get caught up in this false duality that, oh, either you're Trump, either you're Biden, either you're Democrat, either you're Republican, why not vote for an independent, a Green Party, or, again, Libertarian or whoever, right? Why not just do that? And so everyone could collectively make up their mind in that regard, but somehow they're too stupid to do it, so they just fall into this trap where it has to be one or the other. You might say, oh, they won't do that because they feel like then it's not going to matter and they're not going to win. But if you collectively just had that epiphany, like, wow, let's use our brain and say we're mindless idiots who are just voting against somebody because we've heard they're bad on the media, so that's fine. So then don't vote for Trump and even vote for somebody else just to spite Trump, but don't let it be just the other dominant political party. So again, 81 million people could have written in or could have just voted for Joe Jorgensen as the Libertarian independent, or again, any other independent that you want to point to. That would have been, again, consistent with both sides. Trump wouldn't win, so you have nothing to complain about if that's what you're so concerned about. But also, let's hamper the Democrats and this other dominant political party that seems to have real incentives aligned with the media, corporate-owned media. So there's a lot of questions there that I would be very apprehensive about. So what other points are there? It's basically just, yeah, that's what I would have said then. And so what I would say now is, the other thing that's unnatural about the 2020 election is the fact that Joe Biden had run multiple times before. Like in the 80s, he got ousted for plagiarism charges, so he wasn't even his party's nominee. And then he ran again, obviously, in like 2016, and he wasn't his party's nominee. And so the point with that is just the fact that he was never considered that impressive, even by his constituents, even by his own party and voting base. So he never even was his party's nominee, and now all of a sudden, oh, he jumps up to 81 million votes, a record ever in the history of the country, right? How does that just happen? And it happens unnaturally because of corporate media influence and bias and propaganda that people mindlessly accept, right? That's unnatural. You might say, oh, well, that's just because he's that good of a candidate. But even by your own admission and your own party historically, right, you're not asking Republicans, you're asking Democrats. How good of a candidate was Joe Biden? Apparently not good enough to be the nominee the other two times he ran. Not even to be the nominee, let alone to get 81 million votes. So now we're in this fallacy where you have to explain it. Oh, people are so brainwashed and they hate Trump so much. Again, doesn't mean he isn't bad. There have been plenty of bad presidents, but you don't have to be this pigeonholed into, again, the game of false duality where it's one side or the other. You can say, okay, he's bad, I don't like him, so don't vote for him. That's all it means. There's no such thing as voting against somebody. That's how you get the worst leaders in history, because you'll mindlessly vote for them like, oh, well, I'm not voting for Biden because he's a clown, but I'm voting against Trump because he's an even bigger clown. So it lets you lower your standard and settle for somebody instead of having a higher standard and saying, let's actually vote for something we have conviction in, right? Even if it's also consistent with not voting for that other person that you don't like, instead of just doing it as a binary, like, oh, let's just vote for whoever just because it's not the bad guy, right? I'd rather you just don't vote at all, or I'd rather you vote for like an independent or somebody you actually know something about or care about a little bit or respect. Which, again, is not Biden by even his own party's admission. You don't just magically, in your old age, less coherent than ever, just suddenly sprout to 81 million votes when, again, you weren't even your party's nominee before. So that's very unnatural. And so people were brainwashed basically to vote against Trump, that, oh, somehow he's so bad that we have to not only not vote for him, but we have to go out of our way and just vote for anybody else, and specifically the other dominant major political party. That's where the whole trick of it is. What would the media have said to that? Like, okay, you think Trump is bad. You buy into their propaganda, like even now. But we're not voting for Biden either because he's a terrible president and he was a bad candidate. So what are you going to do? Right? What would be their position on that? They certainly didn't fluff up Joe Jorgensen, right? They kind of blacked out. There was this like blackout campaign that her supporters were saying, like, let her speak, let her appear on the media, and they wouldn't let her appear. She still did pretty well relatively, but I mean, either you win or you lose. Like, she got like a record number of votes for independent or something. But I mean, I guess Trump was effectively an independent in 2016, right? Despite being a Republican, effectively, it just felt like he was such an outsider that, whatever. It was a little different. So yeah, my core point with it is just the fact that vote for an independent. You don't have to fall in the false duality game. You don't have to like any of these people, right? That's just my perspective where, I don't care. Like, they're both clowns. They're both just politicians. Why would I have a stake in it? But what makes people have this kind of visceral reaction is the fact that, they see that the media dislikes Trump so much, or that so many people are out to get him, but that makes it feel like he's actually on your side. There are plenty of people who committed crimes, the whole Epstein Island stuff, or, George Bush being an unconvicted war criminal for his crimes in Iraq. But they won't go after them with such ferocity, but they will go after Trump with such ferocity. So what that shows you is their incentive is not pure. It doesn't even mean that he's innocent or he hasn't done anything wrong, or that you, in a vacuum, shouldn't do that. But what it means is their incentive for doing it is wrong. Like, you're going after him, and you're going after him so hard for so many different things. There is almost like some sort of double jeopardy immunity that should come into place at some point. How many times can you falsely accuse somebody of something where they get acquitted in a legal setting, which has happened with him numerous times so far, up till now? How many times can you do that before you finally get it right? You know what I mean? If you keep looking this deeply into anybody, that's where the bias shows, right? Are they looking this deeply into every other politician or every other just wealthy person? Like, why are they focusing on him so much now? And it's obviously for political reasons. Nobody can even deny that, right? There was never this much scrutiny or a microscope on him, regardless of the outcome the rest of his life. And a lot of these same media personalities were kind of friendly with him and best buddies with him. And now, all of a sudden, when he runs for politics now, they don't like him. Even before he won, just on the campaign trail and stuff like that. Yeah, like a lot of non-controversial issues became sort of falsely controversial just because people don't like him or the way he says stuff or whatever, like the border. Again, like, what's wrong with having border security in and of itself? You can debate the exact manner, whether we should build the wall, the whole shutdown over the wall, funding was stupid, right, stuff like that. But the core idea of just simply having border security is not notable at all. Like, there's nothing unusual about that at all. And again, every president, regardless of what side of the political aisle they're on, had some element of that. Like, again, the exact way they do it is different, but like you'd be shocked to find out Barack Obama had much stricter border control than Biden. Why? Because Biden didn't have any. Like, people were just letting people come across the border indiscriminately. And again, even the fallacy of, oh, it's something to do with race, you don't even know. Like, I don't know who's coming across the border, so how could I even know what race they are? Somebody came from Asia, and they went across, and they took a boat to Mexico just so they could cross the border from here, so they wouldn't have to do it some other way, right, for whatever reason. So somebody could come from any part of the world, right, and they come across the border from Mexico into the United States because they know it's not being looked at, and nobody's going through a process or whatever, and so it creates a negative incentive. Either it's just easier, like you could have gone through the legal way but you just don't, or like even here's where there's a sense of entitlement or this sort of weird guilt that America has, like where we owe something to everybody else in the world. Like, you know, you can come in, nobody's stopping you, there's been immigration for decades, you know, it's fine, people come in all the time, so there's no issue with that. But it's like they create a situation where somehow you're in this position of like we owe it to them, like we're letting in asylees and refugees and stuff, right? But the problem is that, you know, you can come in, but you still have to come in through a legal process. So now you want it both ways. Well, these people are scared for their lives and they're dealing with hardship. But it's like, how many ways do you want to be, you know, sort of coddled? It's like, you're coming in, we're letting you come in as an asylee, as a refugee. That's good, right? We're trying to help you out. We're doing something positive for you. We could just say no and like, we're not going to let anybody in ever, or whatever, very specific reasons. But no, we let people in as refugees, etc. But you at least have to come still through a port of entry and a proper legal process. So whether it's, again, I understand some circumstances might be dire and call for extreme action and this and that, but you're getting the privilege of coming across the border. Like, try to do this, so at least try to follow the law in that process. Like, you know, try to do this in China or Russia. Try to go, just walk across the border. What do you think will happen there? Right? Obviously, you'll get shot or you'll get arrested. So or even other countries than that, those might seem like extreme examples, but you always have this position of, you know, why does it have to be like that's a bad thing? Like, okay, so not only should we let everyone in indiscriminately and just not even see who they are, but, you know, we just want to know who's coming in too, just for census reasons, just for technical reasons. There's so many reasons why. And all it takes is one person who comes across to commit a crime, and then everybody has a, you know, now all of a sudden it becomes a big hysterical thing, like where, oh, look at that, like all it takes is one bad person. So people use these fallacious arguments too, like, well, 90% of people who come in are actually just students or hardworking people, and they're, you know, this and that. But yeah, all it takes is one bad person to make the whole process, you know, invalid, because you could have sent that one person back and let everybody else in, right? There's a difference between saying border security means you have to come through in a legal process and just be vetted as you come in. It doesn't mean that, oh, we're just trying to stop you from coming in. The majority of people still get in, and it's fine, right? Unless there's some really valid reason, you have some major criminal history, or you have some major, whatever, you're carrying drugs or something on you. Yeah, that's the core point, where two things can be true, right, with respect to people jump on sort of these bandwagons and say, you know, oh, you'll vote for him no matter what, like Trump, or you hate him and you'll never vote for him, or you'll always vote for whoever opposes him just because he's so bad. And like, the more normal way to look at it is just, you know, two things can be true, or even if he did something wrong, there is a bias behind why they're going after him and why they're going after him now. But the whole fallacy, like, oh, people keep saying no one is above the law, but apparently it seems like everybody is above the law except for him now, because you selectively want to go after him just because he's running for president. Like, what if he just said, I drop out of the race tomorrow? How much you want to bet they might still go after him now because they've kind of dug in and committed to how bad of a guy he is. But that's almost what it would come down to. Like, we'll drop the charges if you just stop running, right? Like, to not see that it's politically motivated is kind of disgusting, because anybody can see that. Now, that doesn't mean that he's right or good. I'm not saying you should vote for him as a result. Probably a lot of people will, because again, they feel like they're spiting the system. They feel like we're living in Russia or China, where, you know, the evil dictator Biden is using all his Justice Department resources and cronies, and the corporate-owned media is aligned with them, and it's like, we're somehow in a position of, trying to stop him from running because we're afraid we're going to lose to him. That's what it feels like, right? That's exactly what it feels like. So again, the solution is don't vote for either one. This is, I wish what people could see, because you don't have to dig in one way or the other. But I see a lot of these people in like YouTube comments and stuff. I was looking at some videos to do with this, and they're so like, they just don't see the big picture, right? Okay, Trump is a bad guy. He's going to go to jail. He'll be arrested. He's behind bars. Fine. But then still don't vote for Biden. How about that? Have it both ways. Like, don't vote for Biden, vote for an independent, vote for somebody else, whatever. And so now the problem is solved, because you address both concerns. There is clear media bias. There is like a one-party state seemingly in the making, like Democrats and the corporate-owned media being aligned, and something about it just feels unnatural and too, one-sided. And so therefore, why let that be? Even if you don't believe it, it's like, okay, you think Trump is a criminal and he's a bad guy, and now at least officially there's a legal judgment at work. So now, I always was saying that too. Since there was no successful legal judgment against him, you couldn't even say that, like, oh, he's a criminal or this or that. People would just assert it anyway, because again, they're brainwashed by the media. But at least now there is a legal judgment, so I have to respect that, even if you want to question the way that it works. The same way that you had to accept the legal judgment of, like, him being acquitted from the insurrection thing, and him being acquitted from the Russian collusion, right? You have to accept those because they're legal outcomes. And so I love the double standard there too. It's like, oh, he only got away with those because Republicans covered for him, and it was, oh, they were, whatever. He got away with it because the system is broken. Now when he gets declared guilty of something, oh no, the system's just fine. The system isn't broken or biased at all. Why can't it be in both cases? Maybe there were certain reasons why he got away, right, in a privileged sense, that were unnatural although the insurrection one was pretty clean, because, I mean, that was just bogus. They even used some of the Democrats' own words against them, like, they said some of the same things or worse things as far as incitement, so that was kind of a weak case. But, like, the Russian collusion and so forth, that's what it comes down to, is that even if you look at it from a perspective that, you have to wait for a legal judgment. So now if you want to use this as a criteria, fine. But what I also find unnatural about the whole thing with Trump is, whatever happens, like, people are always one step ahead of it in a bad way. Like, oh, he's a bad guy, he's a criminal. They've been saying this for years. And so it was only a matter of time before they finally pegged him on something, whether it's something he actually did or not even, right? It felt like, all that you need to know is he's a bad guy, and we'll try to fill in the blanks of how he's bad and why he's bad, right? Like, it feels very unnatural and forced. And see, here's where two things can be true. He could still be a bad guy and have his own incentives, but why can't the media and other politicians have their own incentives too, right? The reason why they're after him is not because maybe he's a saint and he's on your side and, oh, he's a hero, but it's also not because he's a bad guy, because there have been plenty of other bad guys. It could be because it conflicts with their interests. So it could be his self-interest versus their self-interest, but it still exposes them and their incentives. So I do find it a little bit disturbing that people can't see the simple reality where you don't get caught in a trap here, right? I wouldn't be aligned with either party. Democrats make me nervous. Republicans have their issues, but at least the one thing that's more scary about Democrats is they're not getting this constant pushback from the media the way that, Republicans are at least getting held in check, or maybe even too much criticism from the media, whereas Democrats are either getting fluffed up or they're being apologists for them, right? So that's how you get the worst circumstances in history, is like when the media takes a side. And I know what people say, well, it's not state-controlled media, but clearly it's state-aligned media. Like, a lot of networks, if not the majority of them, clearly they dislike Trump and they like Biden. There's a clear bias there. The one thing is, people say, well, why do they dislike him? But that answers the question. It's not up to them whether they like or dislike, right? They just report information and you decide for yourself. So getting back to the core point is, like, let social Darwinism decide. I had like an expression. If it's wrong, let social Darwinism decide. If it's illegal, let the courts decide. If it's, I can't remember. But the point is that, why would his votes have gone up? Something feels inconsistent. Like, you listen to the media and you live like in a different world, right? Oh, Trump was such a bad president. He's so terrible, right? Also, his, like, from 2016 to 2020, also his votes increased by like 10 million. So how do you explain that, right? Like, you're seeing people clearly thought he was better than what the media is telling you he is. So who are you to argue with 74 million people? Doesn't mean that they're right and you're wrong. It just means that it's hard to discredit that. Who would you rather believe? A few talking heads owned by corporate-owned media or on corporate-owned media stations, or, this is very dangerous to our democracy like that, where everybody's saying the same thing mindlessly, that little, I forget what it was. They had that on like a whole bunch of stations, but the point is, like reading a script. The point is that, why would you trust a few of these talking heads in the guise of journalism and whatever that they're doing? It doesn't mean that it's actually justified, because he got millions more votes. So at least what I have to do is at least respect it. Maybe it gives you cause to at least think about it again. Like, maybe something's a little bit off. Maybe he's not as bad as people say. And then again, the final fallback option is like, well, it's not that he isn't bad, you see, it's that all 74 million people who voted for him, they themselves are bad. Well, let's discredit the population of an entire country, or a population that's larger than the population of most countries in the world, actually, 74 million people. Let's just discredit them and say, oh, all 74 million of you are crazy and bad people, and how could you possibly do this thing? Also showing the bias to even have this incredulous reaction. So the point is that, there's something unnatural about that. So what it stands to reason is the same thing here. Why wouldn't you feel like, okay, he doesn't have to be convicted or any of this stuff, right? We don't have to try to get him locked up or disqualify him. Why can't we just do it this way, where we say he's going to lose like he did in 2020, because that's social Darwinism, even assisted by the corporate-owned media and bias and political incentives and stuff like that too. Even then, okay, he lost in 2020, he should, by that logic, lose in 2024. So why would you even feel the need to pursue all this? It's like, that's my question, right? So even if I hated him the most, I wouldn't necessarily want to see it go this way. I would want to say, okay, he's so bad that nobody should vote for him, or at least we have a better option, so that's fine. Or, something along those lines of, if he's so bad, nobody should vote for him, or again, people will vote for somebody else over him, or even against him in the fallacy that is. So all of these other options, why not just beat him like that, right? And so there's some inconsistency that's portrayed by that, like, he's so bad, but yet people who vote for him are bad too, and there's so many bad people, 70 plus million people who are just bad and terrible and too stupid to see what the corporate-owned media is telling them, because they could never have any incentives of their own. They're just literally gods, and everything they say is absolute and objective. But even if that's the case, right, why would you need to subvert that process? Just say, he's so bad, so literally 0 people should vote for him, or just a couple, 2-3 million here, not 74 million, so you wouldn't be afraid of losing to him, so there'd be no problem there, right? So you're acknowledging his immense popularity, but you're not trying to explain it adequately, that, oh, he might just actually be good, or maybe what you've heard about him is a lie, or maybe it doesn't matter as much to people. But instead of looking at it objectively, you're saying, well, no, he's just bad, and everybody who votes for him is bad too, and so, and he has a chance to win despite how bad I think he is. Like, you're contradicting yourself. But that would be my position. I'm not that impressed by him. I don't think he's that special, so I don't think he would win, and I wouldn't vote for him. So what's the problem? Right? I wouldn't fear that. And then if he does win, I have to respect people's opinion that they like him that much that he must be getting a lot of votes. But then I would vote for like an independent if I felt the need. So I find it hard to believe, but the position we find ourselves in now is the whole problem with it, is that, again, people feel like they have to be pushed to one side or the other, like, oh, vote for Biden, and there's a lot of cope and buyer's remorse sort of thing, voter's remorse with that, but where people are still trying to defend it and justify it, like, it wasn't a bad decision to vote for him, but now they're going to dig in and do it again or whatever. Like, why can't you admit both? Like, he is a bad president, it was a bad decision, we made a mistake, so let's correct it by voting for an independent this time. That's what I just don't respect, right? There's no reason why you have to do that. You might say, oh, you could just say that every election, but this is like such an obvious example of false duality where everything is not always on one side or the other. So even by saying this, people would say the same thing. Oh, this Trump apologist. Oh, this guy's a Trump. I'm even saying don't vote for him, right? If you don't like him or whatever. I'm even not saying to vote for him, but don't vote for Biden either, and just make up your own mind and try to have a little bit of conviction in what you're actually doing. So that's what I question, is just the mindless hive mind of both of these sides. And anytime you say anything about it, like if I point out, okay, the corporate-owned media has bias against Trump, people say, oh, you're just a Trump this or that. But I'm also saying don't vote for him, or I don't like him, or I didn't vote for him. So what's the problem? Why can't you see both, right? You can see the flaw of the process, but that doesn't mean you have to reward him or vote for him because of that either. But a lot of people do feel compelled to do that because, again, they feel like they're fighting against the machine. They're fighting against, this whole power structure apparatus that's like, they clearly don't like Trump or don't want him in power. Now, again, part of that could be because he's actually on your side and he's going to do good for you. Part of it could be just his own incentives clash with their incentives. But either way, right, it can expose them too. That's the whole point. A lot of people got mad at him within the power structure just because he kind of showed them up. Like, look how, we're making you all look bad. Maybe that's the precedent it sets that's being tried to be resisted. If Trump wins and he does well, right, we can't have an outsider do well. Why do both political parties have some sort of bias against that, even though he did win for Republicans? The point is that if an outsider can come in and embarrass us and do a better job or as good a job as us, then, who needs us anymore? That's where the two parties kind of realize their own futility, where it creates a problem. And I love this sort of, again, usurping the common person's opinion, right? It doesn't matter about, 81 million people voted for Biden. Like, fine. Nobody's saying that doesn't count or something, or whatever. Like, people say that's rigged too, and it was rigged in a manner of speaking by the media, again, through perception, not so much at the polls necessarily, but again, that unnatural 81 million amount is way more than Biden ever got before, so it's unnatural and assisted by the media in that way. But the other point is that you can accept that. But again, 74 million is at least enough to validate the fact that you can't just discredit this. You have to at least respect them. And okay, maybe you disagree, but how can you just completely dismiss it? I love that too, treating that as a marginal group. Oh, that's just his base. That's just Trump's mindless, delusional base or whatever. Also, that base is 74 million people, more than voted for Obama either time. So if you can discredit 74 million people, you can discredit like anybody. 81 million is only 7 million more, so that doesn't make you right and them wrong. Right, it means you can win, but you still have to respect it a little more. So why you can't do that is beyond me. So from that perspective, Democrats are basically sore winners too. You already won in 2020, so what's the problem? But you want to still do all these kind of things and play the victim and act hysterical and stuff like that, where this is one of those seminal moments in history where, if you let this sort of play out a certain way, this is what people are worried about, it could turn into China now, where, it's a one-party state and Democrats are right and big bad Republicans are finally, all locked up. And this is what it sounds like, right? You don't have to like either one of them, but you don't need to take such an extreme action to say, one way or another what you're trying to do. Because that's just the tone that it's felt like. Mostly everything has gone in one direction from 2016, right? There's been a lot of negative coverage of Republicans. There's been a lot of positive coverage of Democrats. There's been a lot of, negative stuff about Trump, a lot of positive stuff about Biden. You're not seeing it go both ways, right? And you could say, well, that's just the objective reality. That's why. Because, Democrats are just good and Republicans are just bad. But even then, you leave it to the person to come to their own conclusion, by which I mean, you look at it you just report information and then people come to that conclusion on their own. But clearly people weren't doing that. So you failed on one of two levels, right? Either you're not accurately reporting stuff in a convincing enough way or adequate way, because, again, if you're just reporting objective facts, then that's fine. But instead, they're editorializing and they're taking opinions and this and that. And so what you need to realize is you're pushing people more in that direction because they feel like, it's unfair treatment, and I'm not even encouraging that. That's a form of false duality too, right? in other words, the corporate media bias did one of two things. It made an unnatural number of people vote for Biden who never would have voted for Biden before, because he's ran twice before and he didn't get anywhere near 81 million votes. So it was unnatural bias in one way, like they're pro-Biden and anti-Trump. So that pushed a lot of people towards Biden. That's why he got an unnatural record 81 million votes. But then, because the coverage was also so negative and one-sided, a lot of people identified that and said, okay, we're going to vote for Trump to spite that system too. And so either way, right, it went in both directions, but he also got more votes than the first time in 2016, and he also got a record number for an incumbent, 74 million. And so what you're left with is realizing that corporate media created both unnatural outcomes. That many people wouldn't have voted for Trump if they had just reported on him like a normal president, you know, just like regular day-to-day stuff and not taking such a hard side and not been so biased, right? Less people would have actually voted for him then, because they would have said, oh, maybe he's okay, but he's not that good, or, you know, it wouldn't have been as extreme or emotional, like he's just not that special. And then the other side of it is the fact that, you know, again, 81 million people certainly wouldn't have voted for Biden. But that's the whole irony, is that you create this reverse feedback loop. Like, for example, now more people are going to vote for Trump even than last time. And the reason why is because, you know, and there were so many unnatural moments in the 2020 election too, like, and they're using all these buzzwords like no widespread fraud. Like, why does it matter if it's widespread? It's the same thing like with this immigration thing. People say, oh, they're like all these little weird terms. There was no widespread fraud in 2020, but any amount of fraud should still be acknowledged. It doesn't matter whether it would change the outcome. Shouldn't you be vigilant about fraud? But it's almost like they didn't care. They were more interested in just saying how there wasn't widespread fraud. And then same thing with, like, you can say with immigrants. There's no widespread crimes committed by people who come across the Mexican border, but even one of them is enough, right? That's still bad. If they hurt somebody, kill somebody, all it would take is one out of millions, just like happens with anybody, any population. So that's the whole point there. And then even during like the BLM little riots and protests, right, oh, they're mostly peaceful, but there's no such thing as mostly peaceful. It's either peaceful or it isn't. So anytime it's not, they should report on that. But instead they were more interested in pushing propaganda again, like, you know, it's mostly peaceful, but in what way? Like, it's fine, okay, good, it should be mostly peaceful if there's millions of people out and about. I would hope it's not like a full-blown war zone if millions of people are not peaceful, but you should focus on reporting too the instances that aren't peaceful and just pointing them out. It doesn't mean it has to portray all of them like that, but it creates this weird standard, like, you know, everything is mostly peaceful, but you still have to figure, unless it's an actual war, right? But that doesn't mean, okay, so the city I live in is mostly peaceful, but somebody just got shot yesterday, but oh, it was only 1 out of a million people, so, you know, what does that mean? You should still worry about that, and you still have to punish them and go through a proper legal process. So I don't get it, but a lot of these things happening together are very unnatural, and, you know, people think there'll be a civil war or something, but at the very least, my position would, again, just be, why can't people use their brains a little bit? And you need some celebrity like Elon Musk or somebody in the middle of an aisle, let's say, to just say that. Why don't 81 million people just vote for Joe Jorgensen this time? And if he says that, maybe people actually will. It'll create the conversation at least, but because a random person like me says it, doesn't really have much weight. But it just makes more sense, right? If you do that, at least you're not voting for either of the two dominant political parties or these two clowns that we have. And so now you're in a position where, you know, you're not in a bad spot, but you're just, and I know what people do there too. Oh, you want to vote for whatever, this person that has their flaws and idiosyncrasies too. But again, you can do that with anybody. So this is where the selective media coverage comes in too. It's like, if they covered Biden as harshly as Trump, there's no way he should have won, or whatever. If they cover other candidates like independents as favorably as Biden, they do the same thing. But no, just the biased nature of journalism in the last several years, like from around 2016, has been very obvious. Like, it's very blatant. There was always some amount of it, like even when I was a kid and I saw these stations, I would always pick up on a certain amount of bias in what they're saying, right? Anybody can just see it, but now it's just extreme. So I love the ability of some people to see that. Like, oh, Fox News this and Fox News that. But every other network is completely unbiased, right? Like, you can see the process in one way, but not the other, where it's like a hive mind because every other network says the same thing, and Fox says something different. That proves Fox is wrong. Not that they all could be biased and have their own agenda, even if some of them align or whatever it might be.